Imagine a darkened room, the air heavy with anticipation. As history's most disturbing tool, the act of torture unfolds before us. Shadows flicker on ancient stone walls, echoing with the cries of those who suffered at the hands of their captors. Torture is more than just a method. It is a symbol of fear, power, and control. A force that has shaped empires, toppled dynasties, and haunted the collective memory of civilizations. Yet, as centuries pass, the shackles and racks of the past do not fade into silence. Instead, they transform, finding new forms in our stories, our art, and most recently, our digital worlds. From the grim chambers of medieval dungeons to the neon-lit interrogation rooms of modern video games, the specter of torture persists, challenging us to confront uncomfortable questions about ourselves and the societies we build. What compels us to revisit these dark themes? Is it curiosity, a desire to understand the boundaries of human endurance, or something deeper? A need to see how far we have come, or how far we might fall? As we move from the annals of history into the immersive landscapes of interactive entertainment, we encounter torture not as distant observers, but as active participants, faced with choices that blur the line between right and wrong, empathy and apathy. This video will trace torture's path through history, explore its controversial presence in video games, and examine the impact and implications of exposing audiences to its shadow in interactive entertainment. Torture dates back to ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Greece, and Rome, where it was used to extract confessions or punish enemies. Some methods were infamous for their brutality and creativity. The brazen bull, a hollow metal statue in which victims were roasted alive, or the gruesome Persian method of scaphism, where a person would be trapped between boats, smeared with honey, and left for insects and exposure to slowly claim them. The rack, the Iron Maiden, and branding are among the more enduring symbols of medieval cruelty. Beyond the physical agony, psychological torment was often employed, breaking spirits as well as bodies. In medieval Europe, torture became institutionalized, especially during the Inquisition, with entire systems built around extracting information or enforcing power. Yet, despite its fearsome reputation and long history, torture is widely recognized by experts and human rights organizations as a profoundly unreliable method of interrogation. Under extreme duress and pain, victims are likely to say anything to make the suffering stop, making false confessions and misinformation common outcomes. Modern research and the testimonies of both survivors and interrogators have shown that coercion undermines the search for truth, often yielding results that are not only unethical, but also dangerously inaccurate. But the story of torture does not end in the distant past. In the modern era, acts of torture have been carried out by authoritarian states, terrorist organizations, and criminal groups such as drug cartels. Disturbingly, some of these acts have been recorded and circulated as gore videos, blurring the line between documentation, intimidation, and entertainment. War crimes committed in recent conflicts have exposed the ongoing reality of torture and the lasting trauma it inflicts, reminding us that these horrors are not relics, they are current events. When compared to the world of video games, the contrast is striking and troubling. While video games often use torture as a narrative device or interactive element, the experience is virtual, sanitized, and, crucially, escapable. Real-world torture, by contrast, carries irreversible consequences, lifelong scars, and profound suffering. Yet the proliferation of violent imagery in both digital entertainment and real-world media raises urgent questions. Do repeated exposures, whether through games or real-life videos, desensitize us to suffering? Where is the line between awareness and voyeurism? As the boundaries between reality and simulation blur, the ethical implications of depicting torture become ever more significant. Torture in video games does not confine itself to a single genre or era. Instead, it weaves its way through countless digital worlds, each using the subject to evoke a different emotion or moral dilemma. In the neon-soaked streets of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, the sun-bleached sidewalks of Grand Theft Auto 5, and the gritty realism of Mafia 3, torture is wielded as a tool of intimidation and control, painting a vivid picture of the brutality lurking beneath criminal empires. One of the most controversial moments in modern gaming history unfolds in GTA 5's infamous torture mission. In this sequence, the player, as Trevor Phillips, is ordered to extract information from a restrained captive. The scene does not shy away from graphic detail. The player must actively choose from a variety of brutal tools: a wrench, pliers, a car battery, and even waterboarding, while the victim pleads and suffers in real time. The interactivity of the sequence heightens the discomfort, as every button pressed becomes an explicit act of violence. Unlike many cutscenes, where the player is a passive observer, here, the game demands participation, turning the controller into an instrument of pain. Rockstar's narrative does not end with the torture itself. After the session, Trevor takes the victim to the airport and delivers a monologue about the cruelty and ineffectiveness of torture as an interrogation method, explicitly stating that the information extracted was unreliable and that torture ultimately serves no one. This moment of self-awareness is jarring. It confronts the player not only with the brutality of the act, but also with the emptiness and moral bankruptcy behind it. The GTA 5 torture scene has provoked widespread debate about the responsibilities of game developers and the impact on players. Some argue that it is a satirical critique, forcing players to confront the ugliness of violence by making them complicit in it. Others see it as gratuitous and unnecessary, risking desensitization or the trivialization of real-world suffering. Regardless of interpretation, the sequence is unforgettable, forcing those who play it to reflect on their own boundaries, the power of interactive storytelling, and the true meaning of agency in a digital world. These games do not simply ask players to observe torture, they ask them to participate, to press buttons, to make choices, and to live with the consequences. Sometimes, these moments are fleeting, a quick-time event or a cinematic interlude. Other times, they linger, forcing the player to dwell in the unease of what has been done or what could not be prevented. The settings themselves, whether bathed in the garish glow of vice or shrouded in the shadows of organized crime, become characters in their own right, amplifying the sense of danger and moral ambiguity. The result is a narrative and emotional landscape in which torture is not just a plot device, but a catalyst for self-reflection, challenging the player to consider not just the story on the screen, but the story within themselves. When players enter the war-torn landscapes of the Call of Duty series, they are thrust into morally ambiguous interrogations, scenes that force them to question the boundaries of duty and humanity. The franchise has become known for its cinematic approach to depicting the brutality of war, and torture sequences are often used to heighten tension, escalate stakes, or drive home the horrors of conflict. Notable examples span multiple entries. In Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the infamous interrogation room scene sees a character violently questioned for information, with the player forced to watch as events spiral out of control. Modern Warfare 2 and 3 contain scenes where torture is implied or witnessed by the player, contributing to the atmosphere of moral ambiguity and uncertainty that defines the series. In Call of Duty Black Ops, the player's character, Alex Mason, is subjected to repeated physical and psychological torture, strapped to a chair, shocked, drugged, and questioned about cryptic numbers. Here, the player is both victim and participant, experiencing the disorienting effects of torture from a first-person perspective and sometimes forced to interact with the environment while under extreme duress. Black Ops 2 furthers this approach by putting the player in brutal interrogation scenarios, both as a victim and a perpetrator, In the campaign, the player not only witnesses the torture of key characters, including the harrowing scene involving the forced removal of a character's eye, but is sometimes involved in acts of violence themselves. Two of the most infamous moments include two shotgun torture sequences, where a character's kneecaps and legs are blown out at close range to coerce information, and then proceeds to use a locket to slit their throat, a deeply personal and violent act tied to the motivations of the characters. In one sequence, the player can choose to torture or kill a character to extract information, presenting a moral crossroads that impacts the story's outcome. These scenes are intentionally unsettling, not only for their graphic detail but for the way they force players to reckon with the consequences of their choices, both narratively and psychologically. By intertwining agency, trauma, and consequence, Black Ops 2 exemplifies the evolving complexity of torture's portrayal in interactive media. These scenes are often unsettling, not only for their graphic content, but for the way they blur the line between narrative and gameplay. Some moments, like the use of waterboarding or the threat of execution, are presented with little warning, dropping the player into situations where violence is both a tool and a spectacle. The series frequently puts players in the position of either inflicting or enduring torture, raising questions about agency, complicity, and the ethics of using such scenarios as entertainment or storytelling devices. Call of Duty's approach to torture has been both criticized and defended. Critics argue that it risks trivializing real-world suffering or normalizing coercion, while defenders claim that such moments highlight the true horrors of war and challenge players to reflect on the costs of violence. Ultimately, the franchise's torture scenes serve as a stark reminder that, within interactive media, the line between observer and participant is always shifting, and that the ethical implications of these depictions are as complex as the conflicts they aim to portray. Far Cry 4 and Far Cry 6 immerse players in chaotic, authoritarian societies where torture enforces power and fear, confronting them with the consequences of unchecked violence. Espionage thrillers like Splinter Cell: Conviction and Hitman: Absolution use moments of coercion and violence to reveal the psychological toll of life in the shadows. In games like 007 Legends, Rambo the video game, and Battlefield 4, the player's role in or exposure to torture becomes a reflection of the harsh realities of conflict and survival, highlighting the moral ambiguity and trauma that often accompanies such experiences. Horror games push these boundaries even further, making torture a central pillar of fear and psychological tension. In Outlast and its Whistleblower expansion, players are trapped in a nightmarish asylum where torture is both a constant threat and a gruesome spectacle, with every corridor echoing with cries of pain and terror. These games strip players of power, turning them into desperate survivors who must witness unspeakable acts, often with no means to intervene. The result is a suffocating sense of helplessness that amplifies the horror and forces the player to confront the reality of suffering, a feeling that lingers long after the console is switched off. Dead Space 2 escalates this dynamic by placing players in a world where bodily mutilation and psychological torment are ever present. The infamous needle in the eye sequence is seared into the memory of anyone who has played it, a scene that turns torture into a test of nerve and willpower, not only for the protagonist, but for the player as well. Manhunt 1 and 2, meanwhile, are notorious for their unflinching portrayal of violence and cruelty. Players become both hunter and hunted, navigating a world where torture is currency and survival comes at the cost of one's own humanity. The games raise uncomfortable questions. Does exposure to such brutality desensitize us, or does it force us to reckon with the real consequences of violence? The Metal Gear Solid franchise, from the original Metal Gear Solid to the Twin Snakes, Metal Gear Solid 3, and Metal Gear Solid 5, weaves torture into the very fabric of its storytelling. These iconic sequences are more than mere obstacles. They are crucibles in which loyalty, sacrifice, and resilience are tested. In these moments, the player's physical discomfort is mirrored by the emotional torment of the characters, creating a powerful sense of empathy. Success or failure in these scenes can change the fate of beloved allies, driving home the message that the scars of torture, both visible and invisible, shape not only individuals, but the course of entire narrative. Ultimately, horror and stealth games use torture to do more than shock or scare. They craft experiences that unsettle, provoke reflection, and blur the boundaries between victim and observer, forcing players to grapple with their own values and the true cost of survival in worlds built on pain. Dystopian epics such as Metro: Last Light, The Order 1886, Wolfenstein: The New Order, Wolfenstein: The Old Blood, and Homefront: The Revolution present torture as an ever-present shadow in worlds shaped by war and oppression. In these games, the environment itself reflects suffering, cities reduced to rubble, societies fractured by violence, and authority imposed through fear. Characters are not only defined by their actions, but by what they have endured or inflicted. Dialogue and flashbacks reveal the deep, lasting scars that torture leaves behind, both physically and emotionally. The violence depicted is rarely unambiguous. Sometimes it is presented with all the spectacle of blockbuster entertainment, but just as often it serves as a sobering warning, reminding players of the dehumanizing cycles that can grip entire societies and the ease with which cruelty can become normalized in desperate times. Even in action-adventure and RPGs, the motif persists, but it takes on new forms and narrative functions. In Batman: Arkham City and Arkham Knight, the player is repeatedly confronted with the consequences of torture, rescuing victims from the grasp of sadistic villains or extracting information in ways that walk the razor's edge between justice and vengeance. These moments force the player to question both the heroes and their own ethical boundaries, as the line between protecting the innocent and perpetuating violence becomes increasingly blurred. Titles like Sleeping Dogs, Days Gone, The Witcher 3, Dead Rising 3, Legaia 2, Yakuza Kiwami, Yakuza 0, Shadow Hearts, Covenant, Beyond Two Souls, and Game of Thrones deploy torture not just to escalate tension, but to deepen emotional investment and complicate the moral landscape. Sometimes the player is tasked with making impossible choices, whether to inflict pain for the sake of information or mercy, or to intervene on behalf of those who cannot defend themselves. In these moments, the line between observer and participant dissolves. The controller becomes both a shield and an instrument, and the narrative asks us to look inward, to consider not just what we do in the game, but who we become in the process. The immersive quality of these interactive experiences ensures that torture is not simply a distant spectacle, but a subject for genuine reflection, one that lingers in the player's mind long after the game is over, raising questions about empathy, accountability, and the true cost of survival. Through all these varied depictions, video games continually provoke debate about the psychological and cultural impact of encountering torture in interactive media. Some games lean into shock and spectacle, while others encourage empathy and introspection, forcing players to grapple with their own boundaries and beliefs. Each new title becomes another thread in the ongoing conversation about violence, power, empathy, and how digital experiences shape our understanding of suffering and humanity. The portrayal of torture in games raises ethical questions. Critics argue that interactive torture can desensitize players, trivialize real-world suffering, and normalize violence. Others defend their inclusion as a means to provoke thought or convey the horrors of certain situations. Some research suggests such scenes can cause discomfort or distress, while others argue context and narrative framing are crucial. The debate continues across the gaming industry, academia, and player communities, reflecting broader societal tensions over media, morality, and empathy. The history of torture is marked by human cruelty and evolving attitudes towards human rights. Each era has left its own scars and lessons, forcing us to reckon with the darkness in our collective past and the persistence of violence in our present. Now, as torture takes on a new form in the digital age, filtered through controllers, cutscenes, and branching narratives, we find ourselves at a crossroads, navigating the blurred boundaries between reality and fiction, empathy and detachment, responsibility and entertainment. In the world outside our screens, the echoes of ancient cruelty have not gone silent. News headlines describe atrocities committed in distant war zones and in the shadows of our own cities, reminders that the impulse to inflict suffering has not been erased, only transformed. The reality of torture in the modern world demands that we reflect not only on history, but on the present moment, where pain and power continue to be wielded as weapons. Images once confined to rumor and legend now spread instantly online, confronting us with raw, unfiltered glimpses of human suffering. And yet, in the safety of our living rooms, we willingly step into these grim scenarios, guided by game designers who challenge us to witness, to act, or sometimes to look away. Video games as a modern storytelling medium do more than entertain. They invite us to participate, to choose, and sometimes to confront the very worst aspects of human nature. With every virtual interrogation and every decision to inflict or resist harm, we are reminded of the real suffering behind these stories. The lines between empathy and detachment, reflection and voyeurism blur, challenging us to ask not only what we see on the screen, but also what we feel in response. These moments can force us to confront our own boundaries. What would we do in such circumstances? Can a simulated act provoke real empathy, or does it risk normalizing what should remain unthinkable? Are we learning from history, or simply reenacting its darkest chapters in new forms? As games continue to mature, creators and players alike must grapple with the responsibilities that come with powerful narratives. How we depict torture, whether as a cautionary tale, a test of character, or simply shock value, shapes our understanding of cruelty, justice, and morality. The choices made by storytellers, developers, and audiences ripple outward, influencing how society remembers the past and responds to the present. The digital landscape, with its immersive worlds and branching possibilities, becomes a kind of ethical testing ground, a place where we can examine our own values and limits in the face of simulated suffering. Ultimately, the way we tell these stories becomes part of the ongoing conversation about who we are and who we hope to be when confronted with the darkest corners of human experience. This conversation, urgent and ever-evolving, asks us to reflect not only on how far we have come, but on the paths we choose as technology, storytelling, and reality grow ever more entwined. In the end, our response to torture, both real and virtual, may reveal as much about our future as it does about our past.